Heyo, it's Caro. I am back with another video. Like I said, we're keeping it casual, still in my living room, but this time I'm gonna be giving kind of just like a basic tutorial on how to use your camera in manual mode. We're not shooting auto. That is not what we do here. Everything will be manual settings. I am going to start recording what my camera is seeing so that I can show that here on the video and just go through all of the basics of what you need to know. Before we do that, maybe you need a little background on who I am, what I do, and why you should listen to me. I am a portrait photographer in Las Vegas. I shoot weddings, live events, all kinds of things, artists, music videos. I do both photo and video. So I know a lot about the camera. Here's some of my work. And if you follow Carosfootprint on Instagram, you'll see way more of my work. You can also click on my website to see more, or just keep going through this YouTube channel and see all that I do. I hope that built a little bit of trust between us. I have been shooting for over a decade, so I know what I'm talking about. I did learn via YouTube Academy, so this is my way of giving back to YouTube. I love YouTube. I learned so much of what I know from YouTube. So with that being said, let's get on with the tutorial. So the first three main things that you need to know are your shutter speed, your aperture or your f-stop, and your ISO. So we're going to start with the first one, which is your shutter speed. So right now what I'm shooting on is a Sony a7 IV. My camera that's filming is my Sony a7S III. Ooh, actually that's smart. Now my camera is my microphone. This is genius. Okay, this is my Sony a7 IV. It's on a 24-70. You don't have to know all of this just yet. We are going just over the settings. So whatever camera you're shooting on, as long as it is a DSLR or a DSLT and it has manual functions, then this tutorial will be useful for you. So this is everything that you need to know about your shutter. The shutter speed is essentially how fast your shutter in your camera is opening and closing. So it's the speed of which it's closing. So what you see right here, this number right here is my shutter. So if I lower my shutter to 1, that is 1 second long. So if I click on my shutter, it'll have the shutter open for a full second. As you can see, that fully blows out this image. So we'll talk about like what this means for light. Shutter speed numbers typically in fractions. We have all the way up to 1/8,000 on this camera, but the fractions depend on your camera, and that's 8,000th of a second that I'm shooting at. So that is a very quick shutter right there. Your shutter is how quickly your shutter in your camera opens and closes. So this sound that you hear right here, that is your shutter opening and closing. I have my camera set to a mechanical shutter. You can also set it to an electronic shutter, but essentially this fraction right here is the speed in which it opens and closes. If you think about it being open, that is how much light you are letting into your shutter. So right now I have it at 1/8,000, so it doesn't let in as much light. The lower your shutter, so right now I have it at 1/4. That is a much slower shutter speed, and so it is going to let in more light. So for example, we have a subject right here. I'm going to do pretty quickly. And as you can see, when I'm scrolling through these images, they're all really sharp. And I was moving like crazy. And that was because I shot at 1/2500. Now, if I lower my shutter, and just for this example, I'm going to play with the other settings just so that you can see the picture a little bit more clearly, but don't worry about those just yet. Now, if I lower my shutter, right now I have it at 1/15. This is shutter drag. So as you can see, now there's a motion blur happening because the shutter is closing slower. For the sharpest image, based on your lens, you want to be shooting at least whatever the tightest distance of your lens is. So if I'm shooting at 70 right now, I want my shutter speed to be 1/80 at least for my image to be sharp. And then anything lower than that, you can expect a little bit of that motion blur, shutter drag, whatever you want to call it. And that's when you can get into like a creative choice. Like I said, this is a 24-70 lens. Even if I'm at 24, I don't want my shutter as low as 24 or 1/25. If you want a sharp image, I wouldn't go anything under 1/60. And that's with a steady hand. For video, if I'm shooting at 24 frames per second, I want my shutter to be at least double that. So it would be 1/48, but in most American cameras, that would be 1/50. If I'm shooting at 60 frames per second, I'd be at 1/120, or in an American camera, 1/125. You want to be doubling your shutter based on your frame rate. The reason for that is because our eyes see a typical motion blur. So right now, do you see that little blur? That is most similar to how our human eye sees. The slower your shutter speed, the more motion blur you get. Okay, so now we have our shutter. I'm just gonna set it to 1/60 for now. Hi, it's Editing Caro here. I messed up so much during this next segment talking about aperture f-stop, and I just want to clarify a few things. I'm talking about the lens. This has nothing to do with the camera. It is the lens that you put on your camera that determines how low your f-stop is. That's why that number on your lens has an f-stop. So keep that in mind. I'm gonna be a little DJ and get that in there. And I know I'm gonna have to pop in again once I talk about ISO. The longer this video went on, the worse I got at explaining. I'm so sorry, but it was pretty, so I don't want to reshoot it. Now we can play with our f-stop. So our shutter speed is how fast the shutter it's opening and closing. Our f-stop is how wide the lens hole itself it's opening and closing. Speaking for this lens, my lowest f-stop is f2.8, and that is my aperture. So f-stop and aperture are the same thing. So f2.8 is the widest that it would be, so that is going to let in the most light. And then the smaller that you get, which in this camera is f22, that is going to let in a lot less light. I have it at f22 right now. And then when I get to f2.8, I'm letting in more light. Okay, f22, I'm letting in less light. That's not all your f-stop does. Your aperture actually determines the depth of field. So right now, what you are seeing is the full image. Nothing is blurry. So if you are shooting landscape, street photography, anything where you want to essentially see most of the image, you will have a higher f-stop. The lower the f-stop, and I'm gonna bring down my ISO as well. Do you see how now the background is blurry? That is because I've lowered my f-stop and now I have less depth of field. So it doesn't just play with how much light it's letting in from being wider and smaller, it's also playing with our depth of field. Now, a little fun thing that you should know is I'm gonna shoot into the sun right now at f2.8, and it's just like one big fluff ball. Do you see that? If I bring it down, now what I'm able to capture is rays of sun. You can really see it like in corners. You see that right there? That is the ray of sun. If I lower this, it just smooths that out. A little fun thing for you to play with. I think the trap that so many beginner photographers fall into is always shooting at the lowest f-stop, and that's not always essential. One, sometimes you do want more of the image in focus. For example, if you're shooting with larger families, you don't want to be all the way down to f2.8 because then you'll be only focused on like one area, and then if people are kind of like behind them, if they're not all in one plane, you're going to get people who are out of focus. And same with like the landscape photography. If you want all of the mountains and everything and there's no depth, no blur areas, then you want to be at a higher f-stop so that everything is in focus, right? So see how I just brought things in focus? That's another thing too. If you don't have a very clean sensor, like I need to clean my camera sensor, the higher the f-stop, the more you're going to pick up a dirty sensor. So either get your sensors clean. I probably have like dirt and dust on the lens because I haven't cleaned that today either. The more it's going to pick up in focus. So if you want less of that, let me bring this back down. Now all of that is nice and blurry and you can't really tell that my sensor and my lens are pretty dirty. F-stop for video and photography, it is essentially the same. It doesn't change. It just depends on how much of the image you want to be in focus. Most cinematographers shoot at f2.8. They don't really go into like that super low 1.2 unless they're playing creatively with the shot. And that's just because like for cinema, like you're building sets, essentially you're creating an atmosphere, and so you don't want that like super bokeh, one subject focused kind of look, because there's a lot of attention to detail that goes into the entire setting. So keep that in mind. If you want like more cinematic photos as well, you would be playing with your aperture. So we've got our shutter speed, we've got our aperture, and last one that I'm going to be talking about today is our ISO. Depending on your camera, it usually has like certain functions that you can set it to. There's an aperture priority and there's a shutter priority, and that is just essentially what you want to be prioritizing. For example, I shoot sports photography, so I need to be shooting super duper fast images. Therefore, I'm at 1/800 or 1/1000 minimum, because that's how fast these gymnasts are moving. So that is my priority. I will set my f-stop based on how bright or how dark the room is, and then I would be starting my ISO at the base ISO that my camera has. That also depends on your camera. So let's say our base ISO is 400. So I'm going to set my camera to ISO 400. Now, as you can see, the image is a bit dark. So what I'm going to do is gradually go up on the ISO until I am satisfied. Because again, I wanted to shoot at 1/1000, and because the image was pretty dark, I had my f-stop as low as it could go. And then right there is the image that I'm going to get. What I want to show you is that with your ISO, you are also introducing more noise. Sony cameras are really great at having noise reduction and a lot less noise affecting the image based on like the higher the ISO. So my ISO could go as low as ISO 50, which is actually really, really low, and that's really good. So let's say I wanted to do just the standard 1/60 frames per second, and then I have my lowest f-stop to get that beautiful bokeh. Now I've got my ISO at 1/50 because it goes pretty low, which is nice. And then it goes as much as crazy to 4,800. I've never shot that high ISO, but I suppose some people use that. Let's say I'm at the highest f-stop. I'm just gonna show you what the grain would look like. Do you see this image? Oh my gosh. Oh, so that is how much noise I'm introducing into the image with such a high ISO. It's actually kind of crazy. This could also be used creatively. When I see this image, I think of like, you know, like a really old TV, old grainy image. I'm gonna zoom in so that you can see how much grain is being introduced. However, another trap that beginner photographers fall into is going to the lowest ISO possible. I watched a really interesting video about how the higher the ISO, the more details you get into the highlights. And I'm just gonna link that video because it's gonna do a much better job explaining than I can. And then for ISO for video, your camera typically has a native ISO. For my Sony a7S III, which is what I typically use for video, it has a dual native ISO. So the smallest one is 640 and then the higher is 12,800. So that is the two ISOs that I want to keep as my base whenever I'm shooting in log. Now, when you are shooting in RAW, you essentially want to underexpose your image slightly. If you're shooting in JPEG, you don't get as much freedom to bring in details or details were lost. So you want to pretty much expose perfectly for JPEG. And if you are shooting video and you're shooting in log, you want to overexpose by 1.3 to 1.7 stops-ish so that you get enough details in the shadows and enough details in the highlights. So I'm going to give a couple of scenarios for this microphone right here. I want to toss it and stop it midair. So I'm going to have my shutter speed at 1/1000. My f-stop is lower, and then my ISO I think could be at 1/1000. So in the moment that I left my hands, I was able to freeze the motion midair, which is exactly what we wanted because I had a faster shutter speed. Now, let's say I'm going for that dreamy, blurry motion blur look. I'm gonna lower my shutter speed because right now we're focused on shutter priority. And let's say I want it even dreamier. So we've got more of a bokeh, more of a background blur. With my camera, I can lower the ISO all the way down to 50. From here, I'm gonna get this in focus and just do like a little dreamy, blurry motion blur image. So that's when we would do something like that to get a little bit of motion blur. Let's say I really want this entire area right here to be in focus. I'm shooting at 70, which is tight. So I'm gonna have to be at least at 1/8. Now, because I want this whole room to be in focus, my f-stop is high. I'm gonna do around f11, seems about right. And now it's still a really dark image, so I want to bring up my ISO so that we can brighten the image more. So this is that shot with the whole room in focus. And then let's focus on this leaf, for example. You see this leaf? The entire background of the image is in focus. Now let's say I lowered my f-stop. I'm gonna want this at like ISO 400. Pay attention to that area right behind. Do you see how that's out of focus? Let's zoom into that area so that you can see it a little bit better. More of the image is in focus. Now just my subject is in focus and more of the image is blurred. So that's my f-stop. I hope this was helpful. I'm gonna go around and shoot a couple of scenarios right now just to give you like how I would be using my camera. So I'm gonna say that my base ISO is 400. I can't go any lower than that, even though this camera can. I'm not gonna be able to go any lower than that. And I'm gonna shoot different scenarios and show you how I would essentially use my camera in that scenario. I'm gonna take a beautiful portrait of this leaf right here. I'm just gonna do this. Beautiful portrait of this leaf. Because I want that beautiful portrait look, I have my f-stop or my aperture at the lowest so that I have like nice dreamy bokeh right behind. Only the leaf is in focus. And then my shutter speed, I want to make sure that it's really sharp. So I'm going to say 1/250. And then I have my ISO at the lowest that it can go. And right there, I've got my subject in focus. Nice blurry background. Now let's say I really hate that the wall behind is overexposed. What I'm gonna do is underexpose my image just a little bit. Now again, I'm not gonna bring up my ISO at all because that's overexposed. And I want that bokeh, so I'm not gonna play with my f-stop either. So instead, what I'm gonna do is play with my shutter speed and make that even faster. And now I've brought in some details for that image in the back, and I'm gonna go ahead, take my photo, and now you can see the details behind the image isn't overexposed compared to this photo where it was overexposed. Last scenario, I want you to be a little bit blurry. So what I'm gonna do is shoot at 1/6, so that's gonna be quite a bit of a shutter drag. I'm gonna bring down my ISO to the native ISO, and then now all I have to play with is my f-stop. So I wanna expose properly. I'd say f7.1 is about as properly as it will be exposed. And then from there, I've got a nice blurry image because I'm playing with the motion blur. Let's say the opposite of that scenario is me wanting you. I'm gonna bring up the shutter speed, bring down my f-stop, and then just play with my ISO. I'm gonna go to as high as 12,800, and then maybe I have to compromise and do 1/2000, and then that's that image. Because do you see how I'm bringing in some noise when I do that? Now let's say I want that exact photo without the noise, and you're not really moving for me. So I'm gonna bring down that shutter speed so that I can bring down my ISO back to the native, but you're moving a little bit. So let's say 1/250. My aperture is as wide as it can go. I'm gonna say 1250 is gonna bring in even less noise than the other one. So do you see that? Pretty noisy image, much less noisy image. Lots of noise, less noise. Once you know the basics, you want to prioritize either your shutter or your f-stop depending on what your vision for the image is, whether your subject is moving really fast or you want a nice blurry background. All of that, you want to take into account the sharpness and the depth of field that you want in your photograph or in your video. Now for video, of course, there's going to be a lower threshold that you can get to for your shutter speed, and that is double your frame rate. Anything lower than that, now we're getting some shutter drag in the image, and that is a creative choice. Anything faster than that, now we're getting a choppy image, and again, that's a creative choice. Or you can use an ND filter, and that essentially is like a filter that goes on top. It's like sunglasses for your camera, where if you do have to be shooting at 24 frames per second, you're in the brightest, sunniest day, so you have your f-stop, or you have your shutter speed at 1/50, and then you still want a nice blurry background, so you want a lower f-stop. You're gonna have to put that ND filter over your camera, give it some sunglasses, darken the image so that you're able to hit all of those settings. I do admit that I don't have an ND filter, so I play with the shutter speed. If I'm in broad daylight and I want that bokeh look, I'm hiking up my shutter speed. I really don't care, even if it like creates a choppier image. I feel like I don't necessarily see it as much. I just wanted to hit those three main points: your shutter, your aperture, your f-stop, and your ISO. And with that being said, I hope you learned a lot from this video. I feel like I rambled quite a bit, and I am going to have to cut this video down, but I'm just really excited to like give back and share the knowledge that I've learned. I hope that that was really helpful and useful information. And if you have any questions, I can answer it in the next video. I'm so happy to share more knowledge. The dogs are going crazy. It's time for me to go. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.